by proxy also criticizing all crypto economic systems at large, including Ethereum. Yep. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. Yeah. So this stream is off. So now we're just chatting. Should we?
Oh, no.
It's still recording. As in, should we keep on going?
Just getting good.
All right.
Yeah,
Fuck it. We're going.
yeah, I think
Doing it live or not live. And so like, yeah. And so I think Bitcoin and Ethereum's monetary policy are actually much closer than we are giving credit for. And I think the tribalism that you see when the debate between those two issuances is reflected by the tribalism and not much more than that.
David, can I push back on your pushback? So
sure.
I think the difference. So I think the difference, though, in what you're saying is, I think what you're talking about is net annual issuance. Both approaches zero, but there is a difference in that Bitcoin's gross issuance actually is going to approach zero, whereas Ethereum is always going to be pushing out issuance to pay validators. Bitcoin is going to stop pushing out issuance to pay its miners. That's going to collapse all the way to zero. So like validators on Ethereum are still going to always be paid with issuance. Now, it may be the case that because of EIP 1559, net annual issuance approaches zero with Ethereum. But like, to me, there's a big difference because Bitcoin has to, in its monetary policy, it has to start relying on transaction fees, on the value of its block space, rather than the value of its meme. And that's a huge like risk. It's a bet because you're changing the market. You're going from a market that's like, yeah, Bitcoin, we want to hold this asset, to a market that's like all about the Bitcoin block space. And is that where security, should be derived? So to me, it's a little bit different.
So Vitalik on his episode on POV Crypto put this really succinctly, as he always does, where Bitcoin, the blockchain system, serves the asset, and on Ethereum, the asset serves the chain. And so with Bitcoin, you get maximum assurances of the cap of the token. And with Ethereum, you get maximum assurances of the security of the network. And right. So I think we're just going to see what does that mean for the long term with regards to monetary policy. I think the only really way to find out is to just wait and see.
Definitely.
I think as well, just to add to those.
Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
I just wanted to quickly add to those 2 points. A few weeks ago, Ryan put out a tweet and he didn't mention Bitcoin at all. He was, I think he was pumping ETH with some Bitcoiner narratives, but he didn't mention Bitcoin at all. And I thought it was really funny because I think, I think that these systems are diverging, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, and like are on such different paths for where they want to go. Yes, they're both blockchains. Yes, they both got these native assets that kind of like trade on the same exchanges. But I think that they're heading down two very distinct paths. And I actually put out a tweet a few months ago about like two grand monetary experiments that we're going to see play out between Bitcoin and Ethereum. And they're very, very, very different if you actually, look deep into it. So we don't know which one's going to win. My bet is obviously on Ethereum and ETH. Like there are a lot of more people betting on Bitcoin and BTC. They, hold all those major narratives at the moment about being a hedge and all those sorts of things. But I think as time goes on, Ethereum basically acts as this kind of this gravity well for like everything else. Like maybe not those hardcore narratives that Bitcoiners always talk about, but every other possible application and use of a blockchain or a financial system on top of a blockchain. I think Ethereum eats all of that, and then it has enough power to go after the big boss, which is being that global hedge and fighting Bitcoin on those top level narratives.
Can we all agree that it is absolutely ludicrous when Bitcoin maximalists say things like Ethereum's monetary policy is a fiat system?
Are you referring to prompts? Are you referring to prompts email?
It drives me absolutely bonkers because it is the exact same social contract as Bitcoin. It's nothing like a fiat system, and it drives me nuts when that sort of thing is propagated. Sorry, rant over.
Yeah. Pretty clear. I think it's a fact, like fiat currencies are by definition government issued currencies. Ethereum is, it's a blockchain. It's not a government. It's ruled by computer code. It's robot money. Has nothing to do with central banks printing. So yes, we can definitely agree on that. And on the previous issue, we're talking about monetary policy. I think the consensus was that what's construed as being a negative, the fact that Ethereum doesn't, or Ether doesn't have a hard cap, it's actually a positive because it assures that the Ethereum network remains secure. And while in the long term, issuance in both Ethereum and Bitcoin will tend to zero, the big difference is that there will always be issuance on Ethereum, while Bitcoin will have to start to rely on transaction fees, which up until now have been a tiny, tiny portion of what miners are receiving. So it's not clear how the network will move forward, while the path forward for Ethereum is much clearer. So in that sense, maybe we can say we're not sure whether, how good ETH money is versus maybe DAI, but we can certainly say that ETH is better money than Bitcoin. And I think to wrap up, we've already gone, I think, over time, but I think this is an important question because we've, been talking about this for it's been like the major meme, but why does it even matter, that ETH is money? Why is it so important to kind of highlight this fact? Maybe Ryan can go first with this one.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief on this. So like two scalability attributes matter with any crypto money system, any public blockchain. The first gets talked about a ton, and that is trustless transactions per second. That's the throughput, right? And everyone's trying to scale that. That's why ETH2 is doing what it's doing. But the second is less talked about, and that is trustless economic bandwidth. So that is the value of the base layer asset, the value of the trustless collateral that backs the entire system. And the reason that's important is because all of the other money protocols, DeFi protocols that are built on top need to tap into that trustless source of value in order to become trustless themselves. If DAI is completely backed by trusted assets like USDC or T-bills or something like that, then the Ethereum system starts to look a lot like the traditional system. However, if we start to build DeFi protocols that may be partially backed by these traditional collateral assets, but also backed by this trusted, protocol issuance, neutral store of value like Ether, then we can start to build a trustless, bankless financial system. So to me, without that economic bandwidth at the bottom, without ETH as money, without ETH accruing billions of dollars in value and trillions of dollars in value, you really can't build a trustless decentralized system on top. You start to look a lot like the traditional system. And the entire point of crypto is not to look like the traditional system. The entire point of crypto is to replace banks, whether central banks or commercial banks, with protocols. Not kings. We want code. We want credible neutrality. So that's why it's essential, and that's why I think we need to continue on with the ETH is money meme.
Great. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add quickly, I think it's also important to understand that we need this asset to be valuable if we want to keep building on this protocol. So we've seen a lot of Ethereum, I call them now Ethereum attempted murderers because I think they've all already failed, but we see them launching and saying, no, our asset is not money. No, it shouldn't have a monetary premium and all this. I don't know if they're doing that for regulatory reasons or what. Okay, well, that's great, but you're not going to be able to secure anything on your system, right? So we're talking billions of dollars of stable coins and value on Ethereum, hopefully someday trillions. To secure that chain, you need the underlying asset to have value. And one way to get there is to create it to be money, right? So this is a very important aspect that I think a lot of chains besides Bitcoin and Ethereum don't quite grasp.
The ETH is money meme, which really got spearheaded by Ryan here forever ago. It was a defensive meme against people who were saying that Ether is just gas or it's just fuel for Ethereum. when like what underpins this entire system is the value of Ether. So ETH's money is really a reforming of saying like Ether is valuable and it's going to be valuable. But ETH's money is catchier and more fun to say and turns into swag that you can buy on ETHub.
3 words.
Thanks for doing the show for us, David. I think I'll finish it up by saying I definitely agree with everything that the three have said. But to add my own point to it, for me, ETH is money is a natural thing. I was using ETH as money every single day in 2017 to buy into ICOs, to buy NFTs. Like they were actually emerging in 2017. I was sending ETH to people. I was doing so much with my ETH that when the ETH is money thing started taking off, I was just like, okay, well, yeah, it is. Like, how can anyone say it's not? Like, I'm using it as money. It's money. It has all the attributes of money, except I guess stability. But we spoke about that already. So I think that for a lot of people, it's come naturally, and that's why I think it's worked. Maybe it's a very insular meme where it only works for Ethereum people. Other people outside of the Ethereum ecosystem don't really know anything about like ETH being money or don't really understand it. But I still think it works as a good, I guess like bootstrap meme for our ecosystem and for Ethereum, and to kind of make people, money is valuable to people naturally. So if we say ETH is money, then they'll naturally think, okay, well, ETH must be valuable. Then they can dive into all the other reasons why ETH is valuable as well.
Yeah, and I think it's we shouldn't underestimate the power of memes. Memes in the end are just brief ways of summarizing broader underlying concepts in a community. And I think what this does is say, like we've said throughout this conversation, ETH is valuable and it has actual use. And I think it's a good rallying cry to have the Ethereum community not be afraid of these attributes for Ether as it maybe was in the past. So with that, I think we should thank Ethereal and thank all of you amazing speakers. This was a really great conversation.
And thank you, Camilla.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Oh shit. Can you guys see my screen? Oh my god, I'm so confused.
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, you see it?
Wait, I don't see your screen.
We are working on Ethereum scalability, and blockchain scalability generally is this big, hairy thing that everyone loves to talk about, and everyone thinks they know about, and everyone has a lot of opinions about. And at the dawn of time, the first ever response to the Bitcoin white paper was about scalability. In 2017, when we had this ICO boom, CryptoKitties, which most of you probably know about, got really popular. But it was really hairy because sometimes the fee to buy the kitty cost more than the kitty itself. And people at CryptoKitties had to manually do this sort of like volatile fee pricing to make it easier for people to buy CryptoKitties and interact with the application. Right now, I think the Ethereum network utilization is something like 90%. And these performance bottlenecks aren't going to go away, and they're a massive barrier to adoption. Fees are also really expensive, and I think it would be a little bit better if fees were reliably expensive, but they're not. Some days, they're a couple cents, and other days they're over $1. While we were at Plasma Group, we thought that transactions per second was the solution to blockchain scalability woes. And so we worked on Plasma, and we, ground day in and day out to figure out how to scale TPS. Plasma is great because, it scales TPS absurdly high, theoretically infinite. But once we released our Plasma testnet, nobody used it. And that was a bit of a wake-up call for us, because if all of Twitter is saying that transactions per second is what they want, then how come no one is using it now that there's a solution? So it wasn't really a solution, it was sort of a delusion. TPS is a really poor measurement for scalability, and there's so much that goes into scalability. The end goal isn't scalability. The end goal is usability, and scalability is a path to get there. So we did some user testing, and we figured out that it's not just, massive throughput that people want. It's reliability and speed, and importantly, functionality. If you're scaling Ethereum, why are you just scaling smart contracts? Why are you just scaling transactions? Why are you not also scaling smart contracts? I think that was maybe obvious in hindsight, but revelatory to us at the time. And reliability. People want to be able to use an application with the same, experience and guarantee as you would see in a Web 2 application. And so we really wanted to bring that Web 2 user experience into Web 3, because then you get, the fantastic UX that you've already been spoiled with, but you also get this really awesome Web 3 security. So under the hood, we wanted to guarantee first instant transactions, or at least instant confirmations, and really low fees. On ETH1 today, we don't scale transactions massively. It is a 10 to 100x, improvement on ETH1, depending on the type of transaction or computation that you're doing. But it is really cool because we do support arbitrary Ethereum smart contracts. Right, so optimistic Ethereum is really a combination of optimistic rollup, which is a layer 2 scaling solution that scales Ethereum by doing transactions or computation or what have you off-chain, and then the optimistic virtual machine. And so if you think of optimistic rollup as this sort of robot that can do things way faster than a human can, the OVM is what allows this robot to be smarter and do a wider range of activities. So you can have optimistic rollup without the OVM. You can scale simple transactions really easily, but you don't get the full functionality of Ethereum, which is, that's what we're all here for. There's a few benefits of staying really close to the architecture. You can think of the OVM as basically the basically the EVM. It can do anything the EVM can do. What we really wanted to do is preserve the Ethereum developer experience. People have for years been building out, tooling for Ethereum, tutorials, developer guides, documentation, wallets, things like the graph. We wanted to be able to preserve all of that. So the experience of developing on the OVM is basically what you get on the EVM. You still write in Solidity or Viper. You can still use Truffle, Waffle, MetaMask works. It's all generally the same. There might be a few small caveats, like maybe you have to think about, making your function calls a slightly different way because of how optimistic rollup scales. Oh yeah, super bullish statistic. Optimistic rollup uses data availability to scale, and ETH2 phase 1 scales the data availability layer. And so a lot of people are really concerned with the composability of DeFi applications once we move to ETH2. And the beauty of this is that if you are on optimistic rollup, and optimistic rollup is on ETH2, not only do you preserve the existing composability and interoperability that you see, this money Lego thing that everyone's super hype about, but you also get 100,000 transactions per second. That's from some Vitalik presentation in Hong Kong. I'll find the link so it doesn't look like I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass. And I want to show you guys a demo we've done with synthetics of the OVM. But I don't know how to internet. Okay, here we go. So first, here's Synthetics Exchange on mainnet Ethereum. And I did a demo transaction just to see that it would work over an hour ago, you can see here. And the status of the transaction is that it's still pending. So I was going to do another transaction now, but I think, okay, so the transaction's been pending for an hour. And let's go take a look at Synthetics Exchange on L2. Okay, what should I buy? Hey, Kevin, what should I buy? ETH. Okay, I'm gonna put all my money into ETH. Long ETH. Confirm trade. Boom. Confirmed. 145 milliseconds. Yo, super bullish, right? Okay. So this is these are sort of the general confirmation times we expect to see on layer 1 as well, or sorry, on mainnet as well. Although the code is unoptimized, we don't really expect to see that much more significant improvement over we have here. It's a really cool demo, l2.synthetics.exchange. It's a collaboration with Synthetics. They've been super awesome about this through this whole process. They had a few problems. One really big problem they had was people front running their oracles. It's really expensive to do oracle updates on Ethereum. So they were doing them maybe every 5 to 15 minutes and spending the tens of thousands of dollars per year on oracle updates alone. And so for approximately the same cost on optimistic rollup, you can be doing those oracle updates once or twice per second, which is pretty cool. And you can see it all in action for yourself on the demo. You can see the price updating with, well, hopefully. The number one rule of demos is that everything you need to have working will not work when you're demoing live. But there it is. Price updating with, well, maybe not, but you get the idea. There we go, 23.20. So this is, the crux of what we're building. Next steps would be to combine optimistic rollup and OVM. So this demo is just the OVM. We built out a demo of optimistic rollup at DevCon last year with Uniswap. Some of you guys may have played around with that demo. It was unipig.exchange. And so in this demo, the OVM part was completely custom code. None of it was repurposable for any other applications. It was written just for Uniswap. And the sort of milestone that we've hit with the synthetics demo is that what we've written is a fully general OVM that can support arbitrary Ethereum smart contracts. Theoretically, the caveat is that we have to continue debugging our software. So it works for synthetics. And we were able to get the graph working quite easily. We didn't have to make any changes to the synthetic smart contracts. We didn't have to make any changes to the graph. What we're basically doing with the OVM and these, Ethereum applications is that we're pretending to be Ethereum, and we're swapping out the Web3 provider and pointing it to us instead. And so the graph, thinks we're Ethereum and can still on L2 display the oh no, I lost my window. Display the synthetics price charts. We also, surprisingly managed to get MetaMask working. And it's also quite easy to get block explorers working. These are, all guarantees of staying really close to the base layer in terms of architecture. So next, for us, we have some refactoring to do with our transpiler. We want to continue to find apps and get in touch with developers who want to build their applications in a scalable way. We want to hear about your pain points, and we want to know about what you're building. So hit us up. You can go to optimism.io. If you have questions, you can join our Discord. And if you want to shitpost, you can also join our Discord. So, oh yeah, Synthetics is hosting a trading competition. There's like 40,000 USD worth of SNX up for grabs. I happen to be dead last on the leaderboard, but you can, participate and lose money or win money faster than ever at top speed. So thanks for joining, everyone. Do I just leave now? Bye.
Can you hear me okay? Looks like there's an echo. All right. So hello, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. Really excited to be talking to all of you. I think, really excited that we get to have this virtual conference and excited to talk to you about scaling your dApps to reach your first 10,000 users. Before jumping into it, though, I do want to give a little bit more of a background about, how my journey into blockchain came to be. So before joining blockchain, I studied computer science. I started building, systems for the Department of Defense, and I worked in marketing tech for about 8 years. But as I was transitioning into blockchain, consensus was a huge part of my transition, mainly because as I was thinking about trying to tinker and build applications, I discovered that Consensus had Consensus Academy to help developers understand the landscape better. And by understanding the landscape better, it helped me understand, all that was out there that was tinkering on the Ethereum system, but additionally, some of the friction points that you would expect to receive, like as you're developing as a dApp developer. And those friction points were things such as that touch things within user experience, community growth, and infrastructure. And I'll get into more about that later, but because of all those friction points, one of the things that I decided to do was potentially stop developing and come back to blockchain maybe 2 or 3 years later. But instead, later that summer, I ended up meeting Jack O'Halloran. And Jack O'Halloran was building out Scale Labs and decided to tell me about his vision for where Scale Labs fits in to the blockchain ecosystem and how it can help dApps scale to increase their user growth. So he convinced me to join his initiative and help out with building infrastructures. That way I can also help other developers that were experiencing similar issues that I had experienced about 2 years ago. Now at Scale Labs, I get to continue to grow in the blockchain space, but also I talk to so many different dApps projects within so many different verticals. And yes, there's gaming and DeFi, but there's also unexpected verticals such as the wine industry. Of course, marketing tech fits in there too, but there's just a plethora of people building within the blockchain ecosystem in so many different environments. Now, through all of this, definitely looking forward to just like helping dApp developers understand how they can scale their dApps to increase their user growth. And so that was my journey into the blockchain space. And so I'd love to talk more about blockchain scalability next and how we could potentially help that to, help you out in that space to increase that user growth that you're looking for. Now, there's not a shortage of problems within blockchain scalability, but I'm going to focus on just 3. The first one is user experience, second one, infrastructure, and the third one is community. When talking about user experience as a dApp developer, the top issues that you end up coming across are going to be onboarding flow, transaction speed, and gas costs. So how does this map to getting more users? Well, as a user that is interacting with everyday applications, when I'm thinking about onboarding flows, today it's frictionless. I have an email, I have a password, I log in, and I'm good to go. In blockchain, that was switched. You now have to understand how a wallet works, get that connected to the application, understand how to send transactions, and then suddenly there's more friction to just get onboarded. Not only that, but dApp developers, as we're trying to build applications to create a good user experience, we want it to be fast, or at least as fast as what users are expecting today. Now, currently, that's not the case in blockchain. And so what happens is we're relying on our end users to have to be patient and wait every time they interact with the blockchain. And not to mention, instead of having to pay a subscription fee, let's say for an application, let's say they paid $10 for an app, they don't expect to have to be charged any other time after that. Within blockchain, one of the user experience issues that we've created is that every time the user interacts with the blockchain, there's a gas cost. So there's this minor fee that they have to pay just to log in, just to store data, just to view that data. All of that ends up adding up to being a really negative user experience, which, as you can imagine, doesn't lead to your users wanting to be sticky and stay with you to grow your user base. But outside of user experience, there's also this infrastructure problem, where as a dApp developer, I want to make sure that I'm building an application that's really really plays to privacy, security well, does decentralized storage, and allows me to interact with other projects within the space very easily. And as an end user, I would expect that my privacy and security is upheld just as with any other application. But one of the things that's really key here, and it doesn't seem like it really fits within scalability, but it does, is community. Because in the blockchain space, one of the things I learned is that there's a huge emphasis on building community, meaning that as we're building and creating new applications for blockchain, we want to make sure that we're distributing more content and be able to share our lessons learned, forming partnerships to make it easier for the next app developers coming into the space, and also participating in some of the open source projects that are out there too. Now, I won't dwell on community too much, but instead, let's focus on user experience and infrastructure and how this really impacts getting to that 10,000 user base for your application. So to do that, I'd love to highlight Scale and a few other partnerships that help make this possible. And if you haven't heard of Scale or know what we do, essentially, we are a layer 2 solution that allows you to speed up your transactions and also lower your costs. But it doesn't just end there. It's more of a platform that does so much more. You're able to set one set cost up front, because when you decide to sign up for Scale, instead of having to pay per transactions or have your end users pay per transactions, instead you might pay a set cost every month that then allows you to use maybe 16 transactions per second, all the way up to 2,000 transactions per second for your end users. What that means for your end users is that they don't have to worry about incurring that cost or what that cost would be at the time that they're using your application. But it does a lot more than that too. There's file storage. We also make sure to incorporate fixing privacy concerns, and in the future, helping you with machine learning. So let's say that right now you just want to store decentralized files such as HTML, JavaScript, or even a train, machine learning model. You can do that within Scale. In the future, you'll be able to use that trained model and actually run, maybe prediction analytics or do data filtering on your sidechain to make sure that you're storing the right content there for your end users. Now, all of this is built on top of the Ethereum ecosystem. And so what that means is that we're not looking to be an Ethereum killer. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Instead, Scale has smart contracts that are deployed to Ethereum that power and help make sure that the Scale ecosystem runs well. And so in a way, we're able to make sure that we're empowering the Ethereum ecosystem, but also allowing developers to interact with both. So in that case, let's say that you're managing tokens, ERC20 or ERC721, you can do that within the Scale system, but for your end users, also take away that gas cost, and also make it faster for them too. Now, we can't do this alone though, because with any other system, you need partners along the way. And so these are a few that we've sought out partnerships with to make sure that dapp developers get what they need as far as solving some of these scalability issues that we mentioned for your application. And so there's API-based wallets, there's analytics, there's also oracles that allow you to interact with APIs or other internet resources that you would like to bring into your smart contracts deployed into your blockchain. All of this creates an ecosystem for dapp developers to rely on and make sure that they're able to empower and improve their applications. So how does Scale and these partners help you scale your applications? Well, let's take a look back at that slide again. And I want to make sure to highlight a few things that we could do differently. So, using some of those partners such as Portis, Bitsky, Fortmatic, and Taurus, that onboarding flow can be streamlined. And so by just using that partner, instead of having to rely on your end user understanding how to connect a wallet, get a wallet, understand transactions, you can rely on another solution such as these API-based wallets to make it so that way your onboarding flow is seamless. So instead of understanding wallets, they only have to rely on normal logins such as email and password that they're used to. But for the rest of it, that's where Scale can definitely fit in. With transaction speed and gas costs, we want to make sure that we are making the application have a really good user experience for the end users. And through Scale, by deploying your application there, you'll be able to speed up your Ethereum-based smart contracts directly within that system. The same thing goes for infrastructure. A lot of these partners, as well as Scale, one of the things that they're working on is making sure that it's as private and as secure as you would expect. And one of the things that we're working on is making sure that we can be as interoperable with all of these other projects as you're building out your application. So instead of running into the same issues that I did when I first entered the space, you won't have to deal with that friction of having that bad user experience that makes you not want to tinker or build within blockchain. Instead, the space has come definitely a long way to improve the experience for dapp developers and end users alike. So how does this fit within your application? So let's say you have your application and you do deploy it onto Scale. When you deploy it onto Scale, what you'll be able to do is save on transaction costs and also increase your smart contracts. But using the other partners, you'll be able to power your application to go a lot further. And one of the things I definitely want to highlight is that to solve for user experience, infrastructure, and community, each one of these different projects, and these are just a few to name, are just one piece of the puzzle to make it easier for you to scale your application and increase your user growth. But the space has grown so much. And so what we're trying to do, it's going to be encouraging to see that as new developers build within the blockchain tech, that a lot of the previous issues that you experience will not impact your user growth. And so for you, you'll be able to take your application and definitely grow it to 10,000 users. Now, if you want to find out more, all you have to do is definitely check out our website at scale.network. But as I mentioned before, I got my start from Consensus Academy. So I definitely encourage you to also check out the Consensus Academy, because you'll learn a lot about all the different projects within the space, how to tie them together, and what new problems that are existing that are still left to be solved. So again, thank you all for your time, and looking forward to working with you in the space. Bye. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Sorry about difficulties. Awesome. Sorry about that delay. Appears you can't really do two videos at once without your computer crashing. So my name is Eva Balin. I work at The Graph on ecosystem strategy and EIR. And I want to talk today about why The Graph is so valuable and how The Graph is actually making decentralized applications possible. So a few facts about building applications. Oops. Is you have to query data. And basically, basically you have to query data anytime you want to show anything really in an application. And usually when someone's building a Web 2 application, they're building an indexer, they're running their own server and their own database, and they're indexing that data themselves. And similarly for applications built on Web 3, so any blockchain today, usually dapp developers will build their own indexer and run their own server. But what we quickly realized is that's actually not sustainable. It's not really decentralized. It creates a lot of security risk for app users, even investors in DeFi apps. or those that are using DeFi apps to invest. And it creates a lot of centralization risk around a single front-end application versus, actually fulfilling this decentralized vision. It also requires the engineers to write a lot of code, which is something that we don't necessarily want going forward. And so I think Vitalik summarizes the vision best. And so people who say full decentralization is overkill, you only need non-custodial, are missing the full point. A decentralized or serverless application is valuable because it gives users the confidence that it will always be there, so you can safely build on top of it. And that's exactly what the graph is building. So the graph is an indexing and querying layer for blockchain data for open and decentralized APIs. We're agnostic to any blockchain, although our contracts are built on Ethereum, and currently we support EVM-based chains. We're actively expanding to support different blockchains, so any developer can query any blockchain data and easily build an application. So when I think about the graph vision, my background is economics, I'm a data analyst, and so the developer use case is exciting to me. Yes, we can build serverless dApps, and that's awesome for me as a user as well. But what's most interesting to me as a consumer is that now we can have access to APIs in an open market that we couldn't before. And so, for example, if I'm trying to do analysis on market data, I have to either pay a Bloomberg or I have to pay another gateway to access those APIs. And they are also paying other centralized entities like an AWS or whoever their server or database providers might be. And what the graph does is sort of disbands those monopolies and allows anybody to use the APIs and also anybody to benefit. So people can uphold the network and actually earn from it by contributing to the decentralized data network. And so by enabling a market where people can actually earn from the querying that occurs, so the querying of data from blockchain, that isn't only earned by one centralized party, we can actually create this decentralized market where anybody can participate, even if you're not a developer. Oops, oh my God. Thanks everyone for being patient with my illiteracy. So the graph vision more technically is creating better developer experience. So by not having to build your own proprietary code to build your own indexer, that saves a lot of engineering time. And it also saves sort of this like intangible engineering time of, how long does it take them to maintain the code? What about things like block reorgs? And all of that is handled when you just build a subgraph. By enabling serverless applications, we can actually ensure apps are decentralized. Really, I don't think you can say an application is decentralized unless it's serverless, because then it's relying on the server of the developer who built that front end for everybody to have access to it. Versus if you can build these open APIs and allow front ends to run on them, then we're not actually relying on any single user anymore or single point of failure. We've gotten a lot of feedback that by using subgraphs, UIs are a lot more performant. So because it takes quite a lot of computation to query the blockchain, using a subgraph kind of abstracts that and makes it a lot easier. Again, the one I keep reiterating, the global decentralized API. So there's no single owner, no single access point. Anybody can use it and anybody can pay for it. And then disrupting data markets. Oops, that little typo. My favorite sort of visionary that aligns with this is Jaron Lanier, who talks a lot about how, these data markets that we're currently victims to, it's not a problem that they exist, it's a problem that we don't benefit from them. And so if we can create markets where anybody can be an indexer or a curator or earn some kind of reward for, their data that they're contributing or the work they're contributing, then it actually makes it okay. And so that is exactly what we're working towards. Oh, man. Oh, my God. So we're already becoming a critical part of the stack. Here's an excellent visual that I like as a non-dev to visualize what exactly is happening. So, you build smart contracts. And what's cool about, Ethereum or any blockchain community is that you don't have to be the one that built the smart contracts to also build a front-end application. And that's where something like a subgraph becomes really valuable because, one engineer can build this subgraph that indexes data from Uniswap, let's say. So all the transaction data from Uniswap contracts. And not only does the Uniswap team get to use that subgraph and query that data, but really anybody. And that's this sort of vision of like communal APIs, data, open data, the idea that not a single developer has access to that API or is controlling that API. So when we think about what it is that you can use the graph for more tangibly, really it can be any application. The ones that are most usable today in Ethereum are largely around DeFi, so wallets, exchanges, other investing apps, identity solutions, and cross-app usernames. So we actually launched a project registry called Everest, which essentially uses a subgraph of project identities, and that can then be referenced by other applications. And we're excited to see where that could go. Games, marketplaces, block explorers, price feeds, and data aggregators are probably the most common sources of querying data. And the more fruitful that our ecosystem becomes, the more important that'll be. The more sort of like Bloomberg competitors that come out, the more valuable getting data in a standardized way will be. Staking services, DAOs, and so much more. So here's just a few stats on what our current query volume breakdown is. As you can see, DeFi is definitely up there. DAOs also, there's quite a few dapps that are, sort of like DAO factories, things like DAO House, Raid Guild, Moloch. On the games and entertainment front, quite a few games and gaming marketplaces are using subgraphs to query that transaction and trade volume from the blockchain. Identity, wallets, many more. The ones I'm personally excited about are, seeing how scaling solutions are able to integrate it. Now that OVM is up and also POA, Scale, being able to query, information from different side chains and different blockchains will be super exciting. And here's a list of just a few of the dApps that are already using us. There's quite a few more, and you can actually visit our website, thegraph.com/explorer, to see a lot of the high quality ones, the ones that are being used by dApps themselves, and also any of the other subgraphs that have been deployed by really anybody. And a few more visual examples. So for example, Synthetics Exchange is using a subgraph to power their app. The transactions that are made whenever someone pays for a Forbes subscription with ETH, those are being captured in an unlock protocol subgraph that's deployed on mainnet too. For Open, all their data for insurance and options trading is being queried from a subgraph, and Decentraland asset marketplace as well. Now, one of the coolest things, and I keep reiterating this sort of decentralized global open API, and the cool use case that's really tangible today is that the Uniswap subgraph is being used by both Uniswap and Rainbow Wallet. And I have to give a shout out to Mike, who's just so awesome and such a great graph champion. And he is so excited about the vision that you can query anybody's subgraph. It doesn't have to be yours. It doesn't have to be your contracts. And he actually looks at our Explorer to see what new subgraphs were built. And so that's the kind of future I envision is, we're us being able to share APIs, share data access, and make really cool applications. As I mentioned, the Graph Explorer is where you can find all these. And we also have a playground. So if you click on one of these cards, you can go to the playground of that specific subgraph. You can see the API endpoint, and you can actually make fake queries here just to play around, so you know what's going on. It's really cool data. Sometimes even if I am unsure about what might have happened in Moloch or something else, and I don't particularly want to go to Etherscan, I will go here and maybe query like, oh, what was the last vote? And so that's been pretty cool. I'm like a technical degenerate. So really, this becomes a self-sustaining model where developers build subgraphs, other developers use those subgraphs and point to them, and then those developers create other subgraphs, and so everybody's sort of using the same resources and piggybacking off them. And that's really something that was never really possible. Like Web2 APIs are pretty gated, centralized authorities making all the money, gating it based on a certain fee, and this creates a new paradigm of sharing. And here's one of my favorite quotes by Adam, an engineering live peer. Once you start using the graph, you quickly realize the folly of building for Web 2, which forces you to recreate the wheel, server, and database. Learn a new set of proprietary APIs and assume liability of user data with every new application. And I think this summarizes it so well. Like when we think about what the value of blockchains are, the graph with the graph, we actually create a new use case, which is being able to create serverless applications, which just weren't possible before. And so I'm really excited that that's a new use case that we haven't fully explored and, haven't even necessarily tested the limits of, but a lot of developers are starting to get it too. So right now, all of our users are, querying their subgraphs, and those transactions and queries are being processed by our hosted service. And at the moment, we're building out our decentralized network that will be launching later this year. In the next few months, we'll actually be launching the testnet. That's an incentivized testnet, so look out for information there if you'd like to participate. But basically, the way the graph network works is you have these indexers who run these graph nodes in the graph CLI, and they process queries to subgraphs. They compete, based on which subgraphs they want to process queries for based on things like curation signal, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then they also, have query fees that they earn for processing those queries and inflation rewards. And so this creates this incentivized market of maintaining queries and indexing that otherwise might have been earned by, an AWS or other centralized servers and database providers. So that's really exciting because that means you and I, really anybody can be an indexer or delegate their stake to an existing indexer to then earn benefits from this data marketplace. And curators, as I mentioned, are basically also users who get to stake their GRT on subgraphs to dictate, I think this subgraph is actually higher quality than another. And that's a good way for indexers to realize which subgraphs they should be indexing. So maybe a more tangible example is, somebody's built a Uniswap subgraph, and then the Uniswap team also deployed one, and maybe users trust the Uniswap team more, and so they'll signal more on the Uniswap subgraph. And that shows the indexers that this is probably the subgraph you want to prioritize when indexing. So a little more in depth on the crypto economics. So indexers stake their GRT tokens as collateral against their indexing activity. They earn fees in either ETH or DAI and also inflation rewards, and they choose which subgraphs to signal on. Their inflation rewards naturally are proportional to the stake over the total stake. And similarly, curators stake their GRT on the subgraphs that they think are the highest quality, have the greatest integrity, might be the most useful, and they earn a portion of query fees as well. And so this creates an incentive ecosystem, not only for indexers who might be funds or nodes or really hardcore developers, but also curators who could just be users who understand the value of the data they're getting and want to earn from that marketplace. And so basically, the graph network allows us to create these three new paradigms: curated and open APIs that are fully decentralized, a decentralized marketplace where multiple parties are able to benefit, and also query volume, incentivization of usage of our applications because the query volume drives the value. And so, I as a user, if I know, I'm trying to bootstrap the Ethereum ecosystem, I'm probably going to use more of the dApps knowing that, I might be able to benefit from it. And really that's the value proposition of a lot of our decentralized protocols, is us all benefiting from our own usage. And so I'm really excited to see how these three sort of new pillars in, Web3 and also Web2 can change fundamentally how we see APIs and data access. And that's it. I'd love for you guys to join the decentralization movement with us. You can deploy a subgraph, so you can visit thegraph.com/docs to go through that. You can also visit thegraph.com/explore to see which subgraphs are existing. So I know you heard from Jinglin earlier from Optimism, and they actually used an existing synthetic subgraph, the same one that the synthetics team uses to power their demo. You can also become an indexer, so reach out if you're interested in that. And you can also join our community on Discord. And here are links again. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, everyone. How's it going? Thanks very much, Eva. I actually was going to put... Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Let's see. I've got sound off there. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not that. It's strange. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll just try and push through. So how synthetics became unstoppable. Now, some people are probably saying became sounds like a strong word. And I think, that's kind of true. It's a title that I guess is somewhere between kind of aspirational and clickbait. But we are getting very close to a point where we are unstoppable, and I think it's probably worth also sort of highlighting what I mean by unstoppable there. And essentially what we're saying is that we're getting to a point where we're fully censorship resistant. And so, we're pretty close, and we're kind of putting a stake in the ground that this is the place where we're going, and that all of the various components we've been putting together to get to that point are almost there. So the founder problem. There's probably a number of founder problems, but the specific one I'm talking about is the bus issue, right? Like, what happens if I get hit by a bus today or drop dead? Will the project continue? What are the impacts, etc.? And ultimately, it's hugely problematic if there's a single person that is totally reliant on the project's totally reliant on to kind of keep going. And I think there is that element in the early days of a lot of projects where it's one person who's trying to kind of drive a vision, or a couple of people that have gotten together to drive something. But ultimately, that's not acceptable in the long term, right? For a project that's going to be censorship resistant, for a protocol that is going to be permissionless, you can't have a few people that it's totally reliant on. And so I think that one of the things that we're working on is this roadmap to kind of take us to a place where that's no longer an issue. And I'm pretty convinced, as much as I don't think I'm going to drop dead today, I'm pretty convinced that we're in a position now where even if that were to happen, between the community and all of the contributors that are working on the project, they'd be able to kind of push through and continue and deliver what we're hoping to deliver over the next 6 to 12 months. So talking about core contributors, we used to talk, I guess, about a team, the synthetics team. We had employees and things like that. And over the last 6 months, we've moved away from that idea. And the reasoning behind it is that team is a very kind of static, binary thing. Either you're on the team or you're not on the team. And the reality is we have a very large community, very vibrant community. And we also have, these contributors that have come in, and maybe they're doing, a single project for a couple of months, or they're doing, 1 day a week, ongoing. But, we don't really have this very clear distinction between, say someone like me who's working on the project, 18 hours a day versus someone who comes in and does some work on the side and is funded via the grant style. And so this is kind of a way, I guess, of representing the fact that we have a wider range of people that are contributing to the project now, and that there isn't this single group of people that control it, which is obviously where we want to get to. The other thing is that we no longer have employees. So we used to have a foundation. The foundation employed certain people to do certain things. That process has now been wound up, and we've moved away from this idea of having employees. So there's various people who are funded via grants process from a couple of the different DAOs that I'm going to talk about. But it just removes, I guess, the kind of centralizing factor of there's someone who's employed to do a specific thing for the project. So I think we've talked about the potential issues with the founder. We've talked about issues with having a core team. But let's just step back a little bit and talk about what it actually means to be unstoppable. So from my sense is that, and I've talked about this a lot, that ultimately comes down to not having a single entity or a group of entities that pardon me can stop the project, right? Whether that's a regulator, whether that's a nation state, whether that's an individual malicious actor within the project, you want to remove any threats of an individual being able to step in, or some group being able to step in and stop the project, right? And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're not there yet. And this is not really about synthetics even specifically. This is about any protocol that's trying to get to a point where people can ultimately rely on it, and it can become permissionless. And so, in order to get there, you just cannot be reliant on a single entity, or you cannot be subject to the whims of a single entity, or the risk of attack or censorship from a single entity. You really should be able to get to a point where ultimately your biggest concern is a meteor hits the earth and wipes everyone out. Short of that, there shouldn't be anything that that takes you out, or global power outages or things like that. And there's really only two networks that are at that stage of development, right? There's the Ethereum network and the Bitcoin network. Other than that, everything else relies on a couple of people, or a few people, or maybe a slightly wider group of people, but ultimately almost everything besides those two networks is centralized. And so building on Ethereum means that you have the potential to be able to absorb that censorship resistance that the base layer protocol has, but you need to make sure that you don't reintroduce centralizing factors. And so at the beginning, you have to have those centralizing factors, and you need to kind of work out a way to peel them off. And that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years, is peeling off these things. And so our goal is essentially to become one of the first fairly complex protocols on Ethereum, at the application layer, that is also censorship resistant, that is also unstoppable or permissionless. And what that sort of entails, and how we achieve this, is we've got a number of different components that need to come together. There's the social layer, there's the people and community. There's protocol upgrades, because it's not a static protocol, it does change. There's the removal of legacy entities. In our case now, you don't always have to remove legacy entities. You can, not be idiots and not create them in the first place. But unfortunately, we've inherited some of the bad mistakes and decisions that we made in the past, and we're trying to wind them back. And having these legacy entities that are domiciled in various places around the world is one of those things that we're winding back. Another component for us is oracles. Getting reliable data on chain, that is also permissionless. And then the final component is probably protocol funding. How do we ensure that these core contributors are being funded, and that we have a mechanism that allows them to continue to focus all of their time and energy, into building this protocol and getting it to where it needs to be. So I think for us, what we've decided to do, and again, we take a very experimental approach to these things, and this is not supposed to be prescriptive by any means, but hopefully there's some ideas here that people can take and start to play around with and think about how they could adapt to their own protocol. But for us, what we've done is we've split these functions into three components that are run by three different DAOs that have members that are in some cases overlapping, but mainly distinct. And one of those is the Grants DAO, which funds public goods. The other one is the Protocol DAO, which manages the actual protocol upgrades. And then the final one is the Synthetics DAO, which is essentially the treasury, which manages the funding of the rest of the operations of the network and the funding requirements of the protocol. So, obviously, as with everything else that we do, we take a pretty rapid, iterative approach. So we've started out fairly light with these DAOs with minimal functionality. In some cases, just using multi-sig wallets rather than having sort of fully featured voting mechanisms. But we are starting to incrementally add functionality, and some of the things we're looking at, particularly for the Protocol DAO, I'll talk about in a second. Using things like Aragon to enable more token holder control. So I've already talked about the sort of people component. So I'll just talk about for a second the protocol upgrades component. So Synthetics has gone through, I think it must be now 10 or 12 different major upgrades in the last 2 years since we originally deployed to mainnet. So we're a project that changes things very quickly, and at the moment, all of those changes rely on a lot of trust in the Protocol DAO members, right? In the sort of core engineering team. And this is something that we need to fix. And so while we use a system of rough consensus, which is modeled off the EIP process, there's no guarantees for an individual token holder or a participant in the network that the consensus that's reached at that social layer is going to actually be implemented, right? So if the protocol DAO decided to go off the reservation and deploy some change the contracts that was not agreed to by the token holders, as it stands right now, there's no control for the token holders or the community members to actually block that. And that's something that we're working to change. So there's two major changes that we're going to implement over the next month or so. One is what we call sort of governance by exception. So that's this idea that rather than having kind of positive votes, right, where all the token holders get together and they say, hey, let's vote on X, and if we get a quorum, or if 5% or 10% of people vote for it, then we'll go and do that thing. We don't believe that kind of direct on-chain governance is necessarily the best way to achieve things. And so, one of the things we're looking to do is work out a way where we can essentially allow the protocol to be upgraded quickly, with needing to rely on trusting a single entity or a group of entities. And the way that we're doing that is to say, we're going to use rough consensus at the social layer. We're going to bring that into the protocol DAO. The protocol DAO will then go and implement these changes. And there'll be a grace period where the protocol DAO submits these changes on chain, where the change doesn't actually happen. And at that point, token holders can essentially step in and elect to vote to veto those changes if they don't align with the rough consensus that was agreed. And so this is something that I think hasn't really been tried before, and it's a bit experimental. And obviously, we'll be watching closely to see how that plays out. But we believe that that is a way of kind of keeping the rapid iteration that we've come to expect from the protocol, but without needing to be concerned about the impact of trusting a single entity. So one of the other components that I mentioned is legal entities. So I have a pretty strong belief that this idea of building a foundation, going to Switzerland, setting up a nonprofit is pretty counterproductive and not necessarily the best way to achieve the goals that we want. And the reality is that the tooling that exists now is far better than it was 2 years ago, or even a year ago, right? We've got a number of different DAO frameworks. We've got a number of different examples of ways that you can organize people and create these coordination games without needing to fall back to the legacy legal system. And so my hope is that we will see people just go out and make these DAO first protocols and avoid this issue completely. But in our case, obviously, we've got these legacy things we need to deal with. So another component is obviously the Oracle problem. Synthetics relies pretty heavily on oracles, and it's something that we've kind of had as one of the weakest points in the protocol for a long time. We made a decision to migrate over to Chainlink about a year ago, and that process is almost complete. So we won't have a single point of failure in that we'll be running a centralized oracle. There is still the component, and the risk that exists within, the Chainlink upgrade process and protocol roadmap, which is that Chainlink over time needs to get more decentralized to be able to secure the value that we hope to have within synthetics and some of the other DeFi protocols. So this is still something that we obviously need to monitor really closely, and and is pretty critical. The other thing that we need to ensure is that the protocol is funded. People aren't going to work for free, and even though we can use token structures and token incentives and token economics to coordinate the rules of the game that we're actually playing within the protocol, outside the protocol, we still people still need to live, they still need to be paid, they still need to be kind of rewarded for their contribution directly to ensure that they can focus on growing the protocol. And thankfully, the community is still small enough that coordinating this is pretty straightforward. But we still have split the funding into two groups. One group is funding via this grants DAO, which is as I mentioned, small grants for projects that might last 2 weeks or a month or so, as well as funding some of the individual contributors who are working part-time on the protocol. And then the other component is the Synthetics DAO, which is essentially our treasury, which funds, you know, the other core contributors and some of the major kind of funding requirements of the project. So I think, you know, we've been a little bit lucky. We've, you know, managed the treasury fairly well. We still have over $40 million USD in the treasury, which is, you know, I guess ensures that we've got this continuity of funding for, you know, a number of years still. But you know, at the same time, we still need to make sure that, you know, we're very careful about, you know, ensuring the continuity of funding long term for the protocol. It's one of the most critical components of what we do. The final thing is we're committing 1 million SNX a year to the grants DAO. So we've already allocated the SNX to this year, and I think about 250,000 SNX has been distributed already to various projects. But this is something that, you know, we feel really strongly and, you know, is almost completely driven by the community in terms of, you know, the membership in the DAO and ensuring that, you know, the right projects are being funded. So in conclusion, you know, Synthetics has, I think, you know, one of the most vibrant and diverse communities in crypto. You know, we've got 7,000 people in Discord. You know, there's always discussions going on for good or ill, you know, about all kinds of things, you know, the world as well as Synthetics specifically. And I think it's driven by the fact that, you know, we've got a lot of smart people who like solving hard problems, and, you know, they enjoy this kind of experimental, iterative approach to problem solving. And, you know, we started off 2017 centralized in almost every way, right? You know, the early days, it was just myself and a couple of other people, you know, but we had this vision the entire time of being able to, you know, build something that had sufficient value that people would want to use it. And then once we got to that point where we had reached that product market fit, that we could then, you know, incrementally decentralize and you know, take the protocol to where it needed to be. You know, obviously that's not an approach that everyone agrees with, but it's the approach that we've taken, and, you know, we think it's worked fairly well for us. But the reality is, until we reach that point, you know, over the next 2 to 3 months, you know, all of the hard work that we've done in building this thing, you know, is really for naught. We need to get to that point where we can genuinely say that the protocol is you know, sufficiently censorship resistant. So you know, that's one of our core focuses. That's why, you know, we focus on this talk and you know, what I guess is driving us at the moment. And you know, if you've been watching the speed at which Synthetics has iterated over the last 2 years, you know, we've been definitely constrained in some ways around some of the legacy decisions we've made. You know, and we do feel like we're reaching this inflection point where, you know, the shackles will be cast off, and, you know, we'll be able to really, you know, aggressively iterate even more so than we have in the past. So, you know, keep watching. There's some super exciting stuff coming up. And yeah, thanks very much for watching.